It was supposed to be just another fun taping day at the Family Feud studio in Atlanta. Laughter, energy, the buzz of contestants ready to battle it out for a cash prize. But nobody in that studio, not even Steve Harvey himself, could have predicted that a single question, answered by a quiet foster kid with wide brown eyes, would bring the entire show to a standstill. The episode was filmed on a warm Thursday afternoon in August. The audience was full, the music was pumping, and Steve was in his element, cracking jokes, teasing contestants, keeping the energy high. Two families stood ready to play. The Brooks family from Nashville, Tennessee, and the Carter family from Tulsa, Oklahoma. At first glance, it looked like any other matchup. But on the far left of the Carter family stood a boy who seemed a little different from the rest. Smaller, more reserved, wearing an oversized blazer that didn't quite fit his thin frame. His name was Eli, and he was 10 years old. He wasn't a regular contestant. He was part of the Carter family's story. His foster parents, Denise and Aaron Carter, had taken him in 6 months earlier, and the Family Feud producers thought it would be heartwarming to have him join them on stage. "He's shy," Denise had warned backstage, "but he's got the biggest heart." Steve, always the father figure on set, had knelt beside Eli before the cameras rolled. "You ready, young man?" he asked, smiling warmly. Eli had nodded, barely whispering, "Yes, sir!" And with that, the games began. For the first 2 rounds, it was classic Family Feud. Fast-paced, funny, full of Steve's trademark reactions. Both families laughed, clapped, and tried to outguess the survey board. Every now and then, the camera cut to Eli, who mostly smiled shyly and clapped when his family did. But then came round 3, and with it, the question that would change the tone of the entire show. Steve looked down at his cue card and smiled. "All right, y'all, we surveyed 100 people," he said. "Top 6 answers on the board. Name something that reminds you of home." The crowd murmured in anticipation. It was a warm, nostalgic question. The kind that usually brought light-hearted answers like Mom's cooking or the smell of laundry. Denise Carter stepped up first for her team and hit the buzzer. "Family," she shouted. "Show me family." Steve yelled, "Ding!" Number 1 answer. The crowd roared. The Carters chose to play the round. One by one, the adults gave their answers. "Food. Your old room?" "The front porch." Each earned applause, a few laughs, and more points on the board. Steve was in full host mode, riffing off the contestants, playing up the jokes. Then came Eli's turn. Steve turned to him with that signature grin. "All right, lil' man. You're up. Something that reminds you of home." The camera zoomed in. Eli froze. His small hands fidgeted at the edge of the podium. His eyes flicked toward Denise and Aaron, who gave him encouraging nods. Steve noticed the hesitation and crouched slightly, lowering his voice so it felt like they were the only 2 people in the room. "Take your time, son," he said gently. "Ain't no wrong answers here." Eli bit his lip. The audience went quiet. And then, in a voice that barely carried across the stage, he said, "I don't know what home smells like." The words hung in the air like a stone dropped in still water. Steve blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. "What's that, buddy?" he asked softly. Eli swallowed hard. "I said, I don't know what home smells like. I've been in 12 houses, and they all smelled different. None of them felt like home yet." You could have heard a pin drop. The laughter stopped. The buzzers, the lights, even the audience, everything froze. Steve's face changed completely. The grin faded, replaced by something deeper. A quiet, heavy compassion. He took a slow step toward the boy. The Carters behind him were already in tears. Denise covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Erin put a hand on her back. Steve reached out and placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. Hey, he said softly. "You ain't doing nothing wrong, you hear me? You just told the truth." Eli looked up at him, eyes glassy but brave. "It's okay," he whispered. "I think maybe it smells like pancakes. 'Cause that's what Miss Denise makes on Sundays." Steve's voice caught. He turned slightly away from the camera, hand on his chest, trying to gather himself. Then without a word, he stepped away from the podium and walked towards the back of the stage. The audience watched, silent. The cameras kept rolling. Steve Harvey, the man who could turn anything into a joke, had just been silenced by a 10-year-old boy's honesty. Denise was sobbing openly now, hugging Eli close. The rest of the Carter family joined in, wrapping their arms around him as the audience stood up. Not cheering, but standing in quiet respect. When Steve finally turned back around, his eyes were red. He walked straight back to Eli and crouched down again, face to face. "You listen to me, son," he said, voice trembling. "You know what home smells like now? It smells like pancakes. It smells like love. That's what you got right there." Eli smiled faintly, and the crowd finally broke into gentle applause. Steve nodded to the cameras to cut, and production halted the game right there. Nobody in the studio knew it yet, but that brief, heartbreaking moment, one quiet sentence from a child who had never truly felt at home, was about to ripple far beyond that stage. For the next several minutes, the Family Feud set was unrecognizable. The flashing lights dimmed, the audience sat in hushed reverence, and Steve Harvey stood motionless beside little Eli. No jokes, no cameras. Just a human moment unfolding in real time. Steve had his hand still on Eli's shoulder, steady and warm, like a father grounding a child through a storm. "You got a lot of people in this room who love you right now," he said softly. "You feel that?" Eli nodded slowly, his lower lip trembling. "Yes, sir." Denise knelt beside him, wiping her eyes. "You do have a home, baby," she whispered. "It's right here. It's us." Eli turned to look at her, uncertain, as if testing the truth of her words. "Even if I don't get adopted?" he asked. That one sentence shattered what little composure the audience had left. Denise broke down completely, pulling him into her arms. Aaron knelt beside them, rubbing the boy's back. Steve closed his eyes, his hand covering his mouth. "Lord have mercy," he murmured. "This right here. This is why we gotta love these kids better." Someone in the front row started crying out loud. The entire audience followed. Even the camera operators, who were usually trained to stay stoic through anything, were wiping their faces behind the viewfinders. For nearly 5 full minutes, the show was at a complete standstill. The producers didn't dare yell cut. Nobody wanted to break the sanctity of what was happening on that stage. Finally, Steve turned to the audience and said, voice cracking, "Y'all, this ain't TV no more. This is life. This is real life right here." He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but his voice kept trembling. "We sit here playing games, trying to make folks laugh, and this little man just reminded us what love really means." He turned back to Eli. "You said you've been in 12 houses, huh?" Eli nodded. "Yes, sir. You know how many you need?" Steve said softly. "Just one good one. Just one that don't let you go." Denise reached for Eli's hand, squeezing it tightly. Steve glanced back at the production team and then at the audience. "This ain't supposed to happen on Family Feud, but I don't care what the rulebook says. We stoppin' right here. We're not playing another round until this young man knows he's safe." The crowd erupted into applause, not wild cheering, but a wave of compassion that seemed to fill the air like a heartbeat. Steve knelt again beside Eli and looked him in the eye. "You got pancakes on Sunday, right?" Eli smiled just a little. "Uh-huh. And people who hug you?" "Yes, sir." "Then you got yourself a home, son. You hear me?" Eli nodded, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, sir." Steve leaned back and looked at the audience again. "Y'all, this right here is why I love what I do. 'Cause sometimes God sends somebody small, to teach all of us something big. This boy just reminded me what home really is. It ain't no place. It's a feeling. It's people who make you feel safe when you don't even know how to be." The audience rose to their feet again, applauding through tears. After a moment, Steve motioned to the director to bring the lights down and went off script completely. "We're gonna take a little break," he said softly. "Not for TV, for love." When filming paused, Steve walked off stage with Eli and the Carters. They sat together in the green room, the boy between them, still holding Denise's hand. Steve stayed quiet for a long time before finally saying, "You know, son, you just changed a whole lot of hearts today. You made grown folks remember what matters." Eli didn't quite understand what that meant yet. He just looked at Steve, shy and tired, and said, "Thank you for stopping the game." Steve smiled faintly. "Oh no, little man. You stopped the game. I just followed your lead." Later, when production resumed, Steve refused to continue the competition. Instead, He brought both families to the front of the stage. "Ain't no winners or losers here today," he told them. "We all learned something bigger than money." Both families, the Carters and the Brooks, gathered around Eli, hugging him, comforting him, letting him feel seen and loved in a way few 10-year-olds ever get to experience. As the taping ended, the audience broke into a spontaneous chant, "Eli, Eli, Eli." The boy looked overwhelmed, but Denise whispered in his ear, "That's all for you, baby. They see you now." Steve walked back to the microphone for one final remark. "We're going to air this episode, and I don't care if it breaks every format rule in the book. 'Cause this right here, this is the realest thing that's ever happened on my stage. And if one person watches this and decides to open their home, then we did something right today." What nobody knew then was just how right he would be. The episode hadn't even aired yet, and already the people in that studio were... When the episode finally aired 6 weeks later, the nation stopped to watch. It was titled simply, "Steve Harvey Stops the Show, The Boy Who Defined Home." The moment went viral within hours. Clips of Eli whispering his answer spread across every social media platform, captioned with things like, "This is what real television looks like," and "grab tissues before watching." Within 48 hours, the clip had over 120 million views. But for everyone who saw it, it wasn't about the numbers. It was about the silence that followed Eli's words. That silence said everything. News outlets covered the story non-stop. Morning shows replayed the footage. Journalists described it as one of the most profound moments in TV history. Child advocacy groups flooded the Family Feud inbox, thanking them for giving foster kids a voice in such a raw, unfiltered way. And then something beautiful happened. Families began calling local foster agencies. Thousands of them. Lines were jammed for days as people said the same thing over and over. "I saw that little boy on Family Feud. I want to help. I want to foster." Steve Harvey addressed the moment on his talk show the following week. He played the clip, then sat in silence for nearly 10 seconds afterward, just breathing, visibly emotional. "I've hosted a lot of shows, man," he finally said. "I've seen a lot of laughter, a lot of big moments. But that was different. That wasn't entertainment. That was truth. Pure, uncut truth from the mouth of a child who's seen more than most grown folks ever will." He paused, rubbing his eyes. "When Eli said he don't know what home feels like, I felt that. 'Cause I remember being broke, hungry, trying to figure out where I belonged. And I'll tell you this, a lot of people walking around grown still don't know what home feels like. But that boy reminded us it ain't about the walls around you. It's about who stands beside you." The Family Feud team, deeply moved by the response, launched a new initiative inspired by Eli called Project Home. The goal, to support foster youth and families through grants, mentorships, and emotional resources. The Carters were the first family to partner with the program, helping connect foster parents across the country through virtual communities and support groups. Eli became the heart of it all. His photograph, a simple picture of him smiling shyly beside Steve, became the symbol of Project Home. When asked by a local reporter what it felt like to start a national movement, Eli's response was disarmingly simple. "I just told the truth." Behind the scenes, Steve Harvey kept in touch with the Carters. He sent them letters, care packages, and once even surprised Eli with a video call just before his birthday. "You still eating them pancakes on Sunday, little man?" Steve teased, his grin wide and warm. "Yes, sir," Eli laughed. "And we got chocolate chips now." Steve chuckled. "See, that's when you know it's a real home. Chocolate chips mean love." Months passed, and the world moved on, as it always does. But the echo of that moment never really faded. Teachers played the clip in classrooms when discussing empathy. Churches used it in sermons about family. Social workers showed it to new foster parents during training sessions. It became more than a viral story. It became a mirror, one that made people look at their own hearts and ask, "Am I somebody's home?" 1 year later, Steve invited Eli and the Carters back for a reunion episode. This time, the studio was decorated with soft blue lights and a banner overhead that read, "Welcome Home." When they walked onto the stage, the audience erupted into a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. Steve crouched down beside Eli again, just like the first time, and smiled. "You remember me, little man?" Eli grinned shyly. "Yes, sir. You're the guy who stopped the game." Steve laughed through his tears. "That's right. And you're the guy who started something way bigger than a game." Then, in classic Steve Harvey fashion, he turned serious for a moment. "Eli, you know what I learned from you." Eli shook his head. "That sometimes the smallest voice in the room can carry the biggest truth. And that truth can change the whole world." The crowd erupted again. Steve stood up and gestured to the screen behind them, where a montage began to play. Families across America holding children they'd adopted. Kids playing in their new backyards, foster parents signing paperwork with tears of joy. Each clip ended with the words, "Because one boy reminded us what home really means." By the end of the montage, there wasn't a dry eye in the studio. Steve wiped his face and said softly, "Ladies and gentlemen, that's legacy. That's purpose. That's love." After the reunion aired, Project Home received record-breaking donations. More importantly, adoption rates in several states spiked significantly in the months that followed. Officials even credited Family Feud with sparking a national awakening about foster care. Years later, when Eli was 12, he was officially adopted by the Carters. The announcement came quietly. No cameras, no reporters, just family and a simple celebration at home. But when Steve heard the news, he couldn't resist sending one final message. "Eli, you finally got your forever home. But don't ever forget, you already built one in the hearts of millions." Denise framed that message and hung it above Eli's bed. When asked years later what he remembered most about that day on Family Feud, Eli said something that silenced the interviewer. "It wasn't when Steve hugged me. It wasn't the crowd. It was when he stopped everything, just for me. No one ever stopped the world before to listen to what I felt. That's when I knew I mattered. That's what made the moment timeless. Not the tears, not the applause, but a child's simple realization that his voice mattered, that his truth could stop a show, move hearts, and redefine what the word home means for millions. And for Steve Harvey, that single whisper from an 8-year-old boy would remain one of the greatest lessons of his entire career. That love doesn't need an audience, and home isn't a prize you win, it's a feeling you give.